Hello and welcome into the Fog.net podcast. My name is Michael Swain, the Kansas beat writer for 24/7 Sports. It's a Sunday afternoon and it feels like fall outside, so it means college football is going on, which is super exciting. We're going to talk about KU football's 45-36 win over Iowa State at Arrowhead Stadium. I am joined by Kevin Flaherty. We're going to dive into everything about the game, and it was a weird one, Kevin. Again, I feel like we're going to do a little bit of chronological stuff because this game had some ebbs and flows to it. But starting off, getting back to Arrowhead, it looked a little different this time with all the Chiefs stuff going around, and the pregame atmosphere was really cool. Obviously, a lot of Iowa State fans made the trip down. They got there early. KU fans, obviously, with Carolina game night before, living closer, right? Packed the parking lot as the game got closer. But it really was a fun atmosphere there, Kevin. It felt a lot like your traditional neutral site game, honestly, but I thought that KU fans really did show up in droves. And I know that there were some people, myself included, who were maybe a little bit concerned about what the total number of Iowa State fans to KU fans would look like. But I think at the end of the day, KU fans did a good job and showed out. And despite it being a season that has left some to be desired, credit to the fans for showing up and supporting those guys out there. But what was your perspective? Let's start with kind of the pregame atmosphere, because it felt like a fun kind of college football atmosphere heading into it.
It did, and I'm glad you brought that up because I did think that KU fans did a nice job of turning out. And you wonder if the fear of basically an Iowa State packed Arrowhead maybe drove some people to head out there when maybe they wouldn't have. There were a lot of Iowa State fans there, and the tailgate atmosphere I thought was really cool. And obviously we walked through all of that on our way into the stadium, but I thought the atmosphere was great. It was kind of funny to see the Chiefs logos still on the field, to see 4 sets of hashes, because I guess you had the 2 closer hashes for the pros and the 2 further ones out for college. But no, it was a really great college football atmosphere. I think it was interesting going in, and I'm interested to get your thoughts sort of before we get into the game. I thought Kansas would play well coming off of a bye week. I think that that's something that Lance Leipold and the staff have done really well. And it's something that I feel like you actually brought up. We've been doing this for, I feel like, 3 or so years now on this podcast. I feel like this is actually something you brought up maybe even 2 years ago, maybe last year, that, hey, they seem to have this bye week thing kind of figured out pretty well.
Well, yeah, and they're a coaching staff that is very good at game planning, right? I think we've seen that throughout the course of the year, especially offensively. KU's come out and started games really, really well. And I think the schedule that KU uses for the bye week, and we're not going to have to get into it too much, but
Sure.
they've got it nailed down now. The players know what's going to happen. They've got the getting off the bye part of it, right? Where you're finishing up the bye week, you get into game week practice. They've really figured that part out. And Kevin, I think I wrote this a few different places. This was a game I thought was going to be close. And I was listening to the Cover 3 podcast last week. I can't remember which episode, but it was one of them when I was on a run. And they were talking about how the Big 12 is just basically the NFL without the players. Sure. Because every single week, Kevin, if I were to go right now and look at the early spreads for next week in the Big 12, nothing is going to be over 6.5. Yeah. I'd be shocked if there's maybe over 7.5, I should say. But everything's going to be close. And so going into this game, I was like, it's going to be close. I don't know who's going to win or lose. It's going to come down probably to turnover margin and who kind of can make the fewer mistakes. And what do you know? KU made the fewer mistakes, got the pick 6. That ends up being the difference. But I thought it was going to be close. And I think the start of the game for me, Kevin, gave me some oh boy, with the way that KU's first offensive drive went. Because KU ran the ball up the middle once to Devin Neal for 14 yards. He becomes KU's all-time leading rusher. A really cool moment for him. Ends up being a historical day. But then KU goes, speed option, and then another outside run on 3rd and long. And you're just like, oh my gosh. In the press box, I'm thinking, oh no. You punt it, they get it to 1. They go 99 yards, and there were some really poor defensive plays on that first drive. And I'm sitting there thinking that is the last thing you wanted to see from KU in this game, because it feels like for KU this season, game state has been really important, and playing with the lead has been really important. And to go from having the ball first to all of a sudden being down and feeling like you needed to score because of how easy Iowa State moved the ball, that was a little bit of a concerning start. Where were you at mentally? Because I was thinking that was not what you wanted to see from KU if you're thinking this is going to be a game that's going to come down to the wire.
Well, first, we talk to Jeff Grimes every week, obviously, and he's joked a couple times that sometimes the best time to run it is when the other team doesn't expect it. Sometimes third and long is that situation. And they had success with that against K-State. They had 2 long touchdown runs where they ran it on third and long to the point where you're thinking you should not be running the ball when you're that far from the chains. I think the part that I thought was interesting, I felt coming out of the K-State game, hey, if you run this on 3rd and 13 and you don't get it, there's going to be some mad fans out there saying, why'd you run the ball up the middle in this situation? They wind up getting a solid gain, make it 4th and 5, 4th and 6. I think a lot of us at that point felt like, well, why'd you run it if you weren't then going to go for it if you got into a more 4th and more manageable? The punt kind of shut us up a little bit, being down at the 1. But then going 99 yards in 7 plays, to your point too, I really thought going in the way KU started was going to be a huge key in this game because they've had so much success. You've reported on it at FogNet. They've had so much success in the scripted portion of games. And so to wind up punting the ball on your first drive and then have Iowa State score so quickly on their first drive, as weird as it sounds, because it's only your second drive of the game, it almost felt like okay, you have to do something with this drive because the start was so rocky.
Yeah, and I think it was 4th and 4 even. I think it was even shorter. It felt like you could do it, but I think if you follow how Lance Leipold calls these things, right, you had a feeling it was going to be a punt. And then all of a sudden KU responds, right? And it's really quick. Second play, the next drive, right? Daniels finds Luke Grimm, 70-yard touchdown. And all of a sudden it's like, okay, you're back now. And at that point in time, that play kind of ends up being a little symbolic of what you saw from KU kind of over the next 25 minutes, where offensively for KU, like I'll pull up the numbers here. You can see where the first drive ends and where the big play is. Obviously this shows EPA, estimated points added, basically how you're performing above baseline expectation. And you can see start of the game, KU, not great. Then all of a sudden, 70-yard touchdown is going to add a lot of points, right? Because you're not expected to go 70 yards on a 2nd and 5 from, I think, your own 29. So, but from there, you see it just climb all the way up until you get to about play 23, 24. And I mean, at that point, KU had blown the game wide open because of how just dynamic and efficient KU was offensively. And watching this first half, Kevin, offensively for KU, I was thinking, this is what it should have looked like all season. And obviously we've covered why it hasn't, right? Jalen was rusty and it took a while, right? Jeff Grimes was trying to run some stuff that he had run for a while. Kevin, when was the last time you saw a freaking screen pass? Or, some of the other stuff that KU was trying to mix in that Grimes had called previously? Well, that's not a thing anymore. And all of a sudden now KU's just scheming the heck out of the game plan. Right? Trevor Cardell's running wide open. Guys are wide open over the middle of the field. And that's not something that I remember. And I could totally be wrong. So call me out if I am. But I don't remember guys running, wide A open all game this season. It's been a lot of guys are semi-covered, but Jalen has to make a good throw. Guys have to make a good catch. This was a game where it was just pitch and catch. It was a great game plan for KU coming into this one. And they really took advantage of this Iowa State secondary. And look, Iowa State was banged up, right? Their linebackers are a bunch of first and second year players, and they've got some walk-ons playing from, rural Iowa, right? Not guys that are going to be athletically up to Big 12 standard as redshirt freshmen. But the secondary, Miles Purchase is a starter. Jontez Williams is a starter. Jeremiah Cooper's a starter. Bo Freeler's a starter. Like the secondary was still the guys they've had for most of this year. They were missing Malik Verdon, and that's it. So for KU to do what they did against secondary, like the whole, injury argument doesn't really hold weight. KU just schemed the crap out of the game plan. And that was, I think, pretty encouraging to see. And one of those where you just watched KU move offensively and you're like, man, this is what when I was thinking about what this would look like this year, this is what I was imagining.
Well, it's funny. I seem to remember, wasn't it you asking about the lack of explosive plays like third week, fourth week, somewhere around in there
Oh, yes, I did. Yeah.
at a press conference?
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's part of the reason why you did, right? Because there's a major difference between having to take 12 plays to go 80 yards and covering 80 yards in 3 plays. And when you're able to generate the explosives, and credit to Jalen Daniels for, shaking off the rust. Credit too goes to Quentin Skinner. Obviously he had the big drop against Kansas State that was unfortunate, but he was terrific, against Arizona State, terrific again against Iowa State. And when he's taking the top off the defense like that, Luke Grimm able to take the top off the defense for that first touchdown, all of a sudden, the areas that you just talked about, they're opening up. All of a sudden, your tight end is not necessarily having to run into a crowded middle of the field where there are multiple guys that can take away his route. You're stretching things out. And I think that they've been able to stretch things out horizontally in the running game. I think that's been one of the nice developments the last few weeks. They've continued to add to the quarterback running game and add some stuff. It feels like each week the quarterback running game is taking another step forward in terms of the complexity and the things they're doing there. But the biggest part is just taking the top off the defense vertically. Kansas was able to do that early in this one. And while you can look at it and say, okay, this is a big explosive play here, this is a big explosive play here, I think that also really opened up the intermediate stuff in the passing game as well, which made, the gains in the running game and the more consistent gains in the passing game, it made it more accessible.
Exactly. Yeah. And I thought, KU really not the first time this year, but, the middle of the field was something that I don't think that KU necessarily was doing a great job of attacking early in the year. And all of a sudden you look in this game and, you kind of look middle of the field, 20 yards and in, right? Jalen's 4 of 4 for 72 yards.
Yep.
That was a part of the field that I felt like KU was able to open up in this game a little bit more. And you look at just the overall, the way KU's offense operated. It was interesting because I feel like a lot of times this season, Kevin, in the run game for KU, it's been explosive runs, 20 yards. And so that really move the ball. And then some passes that will help you get in the end zone. It was almost the opposite of this game.
Yeah.
Where you look at Devin Neal and, longest run of the game is 14 yards. And he still averaged 6.5 yards a carry.
First carry of the game.
Yeah. Oh, you're right. That is the longest carry, first carry of the game. But it shows you just how consistent KU was running the ball and how KU was able to take advantage of the depleted front six for Iowa State. And I thought that was a part that then set up some of that passing down stuff, because then Iowa State was having to account for the fact that they are outmanned in the front six in this game. And just overall, Lance Apple talked about it post game, but he said he felt Jeff Grimes called a really good game. And I think this was probably the best called game that he has run since he's been at Kansas. And I just think that the first half, I don't know what you could have asked to go better outside of that first drive, right? They maximized basically everything. And it was just really impressive to see, and especially the manner in which they did it, where it was explosive, but also not fluky, where like sometimes you can watch a game, right, and you can see a team get explosive plays, but they suck down to down. And you're like, how the heck are they doing this? Well, this was a game where KU down to down was really solid, or at least in the first half was really solid. And then they had the explosive plays on top. So I don't know what else you could ask for from a first half from KU.
Yeah, I agree 100%. I think one of the interesting things about it was Jalen had just huge numbers at halftime. Was it like 234 passing yards, something like that? And somebody on Twitter had asked me and said, is Jalen going to throw for like 450 in this one? And I said, no. I said, it feels like the running game, though, was sustainable. And I said, it feels like they're going to maybe approach 250 rushing yards in this one with the level of success that they were having on the ground, sort of down over down. They didn't quite get to 250. They got to 237. But at the same time, that was the part where you're like, hey, they've hit on the shot plays in the passing game. they probably aren't going to hit shot plays all game. And
Mm.
so Jalen at that point, his passer rating, I think, was in the 300s. And that was not going to hold up. But what was potentially going to hold up was that was going to open up some other parts of the game, and it opened up the running game. Kansas averaged 5.2 yards per carry, and Swain, I know you and I talked about this heading into the game. Kansas has not run the ball well on Iowa State. You can
No.
argue that they've struggled to run the ball on a lot of three-man fronts that they've faced over Lance Leipold's tenure when Andy Kotelnicki was here. When you look at the Texas Tech game
Yeah.
a year ago, when you look at Oklahoma State, I think 2 years or last year, they really struggled to run against Oklahoma State. Iowa State's the best at it. They really are. Everybody else is kind of ripping that from Iowa State or trying to rip it from Iowa State. And Kansas heading into this one, I think the matchups in 22 and 23, KU averaged a combined 2.8 yards per carry. And knowing how much Kansas wanted to run the ball and how much of a backbone of the offense that was for those 22 and 23 teams to average 2.8 yards per carry really shows how much they struggled with it. To put up 5.2 yards per carry in this one really shows, they had something working in the running game. Not just, like you said, it wasn't like it was a 50-yard gain followed by a 70-yard gain in the running game. It was consistent chunks.
Yeah, exactly. And that is an encouraging part of this physical development of KU too, where I think just this offensive line is maybe the best run blocking offensive line KU has had since Leipold got to KU. Just their ability to create holes and get out to the second, like it is a really, really physical front that KU is working with. And that's just been really something they've been able to build off of. And in this game, I think it really came to a head where they were able to take advantage of a physical, advantage that they had in the trenches. Now, defensively in the first half for KU, it was equally about as good as you could ask for outside of that first drive. KU gets a punt on the next drive, then a 3-and-out, and then there's the field goal drive, which I don't know what the heck Matt Campbell's thinking. Like, what are you doing? Kicking a field goal there? Like, I think at that point, I got to look at this chronologically here, but they were down to, it would have been 21-7, and you're kicking a field goal. When your defense hasn't been able to stop a nosebleed all first half. That made no sense to me. But then, right, so field goal, then the KU forces another 3-and-out, and then it's another field goal. That one makes sense. That was an end of half situation. But just defensively, I think KU did a really good job of responding. Obviously, you make a personnel change in the secondary after the first drive, and that player is no longer being, taken advantage of by Iowa State. And I thought generally, right, after that first drive, KU really buckled down and did a great job of keeping Iowa State from doing what it's done best this year, which is getting the ball to Nolan Higgins on the outside. And then the Iowa State offensive line is not very good at run blocking, but what they do is they allow those running backs to get to the line of scrimmage and make a guy miss and go. And I thought KU's front did a really good job of creating enough knockback where those guys didn't really have a ton of room to go and hit, right? There were some good runs, no doubt about that. There were some good runs from Iowa State in that first half, but you still look at it, 3.5 yards a carry in the first half on 15 carries. I thought defensively for KU, again, about as good as you could ask for after that first drive.
Yeah, I 100% agree. This defense is not going to be a shutdown defense. It just isn't at this point. I think there are flaws there at multiple areas. One of which is, hey, they don't generate pass rush with their front four, at least not consistently. They have to send extra guys to help with that. I think there are some other potential flaws in there as well. They're not Georgia. They're not, Texas. It's not a shutdown defense. And so what you can do is I think they're going to have spurts where they're capable of playing at a really high level. We talked last week about how good they were in the second half, and particularly in the fourth quarter against K-State, or I guess 2 weeks ago, before the bye. They allowed 2.2 yards a carry or a play to K-State in the fourth quarter. And so they're capable of pretty strong stretches. I think that was almost best case scenario for Kansas's defense in the first half after that first drive was, hey, Iowa State's still going to move the ball on you. Keep them out of the end zone, right? You allow 2 field goals the rest of the half. Don't let them get in the end zone. That allows you to build a lead where it's
Yeah.
not Kansas 31, Iowa State 24, and you're still biting on your fingernails. You're actually up 18 points at halftime because of what the offense is doing, but also because the defense is generating stops, holding them to field goals when they get into those positions. And so I thought the defense played pretty well after that first drive.
Yeah, and an underrated part of what KU was able to do defensively, I think, is how they really stopped Rocco from being a run threat. And he's
Yep.
not someone that is going to, I don't know, like you're not going to do read option with Rocco Becht as your quarterback. But what he does do is a lot of what Garrett Green does for West Virginia, which is when you give him the opportunity to scramble, he's pretty good at scrambling.
Yeah.
And you look at what Rocco has been this year, right? And I wrote about it pregame. He's like the 35th or 36th most pressured quarterback in the FBS, according to like PFF. But in the Big 12, he had been sacked just 10 times, which was fourth fewest, something like that.
Yep.
And you look today, or not today, on Saturday, and KU did a great job of containment. That doesn't
Yep.
mean KU struggled with so much. But then you look the last couple games, and Avery Johnson had a couple good runs. And he's almost a unicorn in some instances because of how good of an athlete he is. But Zion Chris did not do much for Houston. You
Yep.
look at Rocco in this game, he didn't do a ton. And KU comes out of here with 3 sacks. And considering he had 10 sacks over 8 games, I want to say, heading into this, like to get 3 in this game shows you how well KU did at containing Rocco, not letting him get free. And I think they could have had more sacks because, like, I don't know if the got to look here to see if the Ron McGee one counted.
They
Yeah,
didn't. Yeah, I was going to say that
like that's a
basically they
fact.
had a forced sack. That was a sack for no gain. I know that sounds weird, but like he had him in the backfield and
Yeah,
then he fell forward or he carried him forward. But yeah, it basically was a sack.
yeah. And so overall, like I think KU just did a very good job of playing sound football in the first half, and it's just something that you've seen. I think some pivoting of how KU's approaching rushing quarterbacks. Where I think I don't know, I'm probably guessing here, but it just doesn't look the same as it did
No.
against UNLV and against West Virginia, where those guys were able to get free so often. It felt different in this game with how KU was approaching it. And so that leads me to believe that something is different with the way KU is, defending this, where I don't know if they've changed the spy rules or something like that, but KU has tweaked something very clearly. And it has resulted in them being able to keep the quarterbacks that can run from running.
It feels interesting too because those games that you're talking about, like UNLV, it seemed like they were rushing 4 a lot, and the quarterback was just kind of sitting back there, not pressured, waiting for somebody to get out of their rush lane and then being able to take off. And
Yeah.
one of the differences between them sending more pressure and not sending pressure, I think when they've sent pressure, they haven't gotten burned maybe as much as you would have thought. Iowa State had the nice little screen pass when KU did send a bunch of guys. But for the most part, Swain, like KU's gotten more hurt, I feel like, when they don't send guys. When a quarterback has time to sit back there and get comfortable and either find an open receiver or find a running lane, I think that's been part of where they've struggled. And with them ramping up the blitzing a little bit more, it probably gives the quarterback a little bit more to think about. And I do think that I'd be interested to hear from Borland if they have changed. Hey, this is how we're spying on quarterbacks. This is how we're making sure that quarterbacks don't get us. Because, like you said, that was a little bit of I don't want to say undersung, but at the same time, it was something that maybe not a lot of people talked about in terms of being a big part of this game. But you had to contain Rocco Becht if you were going to win this one.
Yeah, because he's someone that can turn a 3rd and 6 into a 1st and 10.
Sure.
With the way he moves. And I pull up the EPA stuff again here just to showcase that you could see on the first drive, right, for Iowa State, how well they did. And then from there, like, they had a couple good plays here and there. explosive plays to help get them into like field goal territory. But down to down, like KU was very, very good in that first half. And look, even into the second half, KU really did start the second half really, really well.
Yeah.
You look at KU's defense, right, forcing that turnover on downs, JB Brown making the nice tackle, right? Then the offense takes
That
it.
was an unbelievable play, by the way, because you go back and watch, and he fights through 2 blockers. He
Yeah,
engages with the offensive lineman, pops off of him, engages with the lead blocker,
yeah.
pops off of him, and then absolutely stonewalls the ball carrier short of the sticks. I mean, it was impressive, and we've talked about JB Brown being a really impressive weight room guy, being a really impressive athlete, but you take that stuff and add in the effort level that he showed right
Mhm.
there, and you get, in my opinion, it was one of the 5 best plays of the game, probably.
I think so. I think so. And then the offense takes over, right? It's not a super sexy drive, but it's one of those where very methodical from KU. And you can kind of see it in the EPA stuff here where KU kind of flattens out in the middle of the game where it's just kind of average. It's not super remarkable. Um, and KU on this drive, you mentioned earlier, Kevin, that KU really wanted maybe lean in the running game in the second half. Well, this first drive of the second half really showcases that. It's about a 5.5 minute drive, 11 plays, 59 yards. They take their time moving the ball. And this reminded me of the drive against BYU last year, when I think was the first time I'd ever really seen Kansas just squeeze the life out of a game. And they
Yep.
did it against BYU. I can't remember the exact specifics of that drive, but I remember going to that post game and asking, Lance about the physicality that KU played with. And that was really the first time. And this was a game where it felt like that's what the second half was going to be. And KU did a good job on that first drive. And even again on the second drive, where it's a 6-minute drive that ends up in a field goal missed. But you can see here on the EPA stuff how it's just kind of it flattens. Then start of the second half, it's a little bit better, and then offensively, it's flat, and then it goes down. Where it felt like things got a little bit more, a little conservative at some points, and maybe a little too aggressive.
Sure.
It felt like a little flip flopping here, where there wasn't that happy medium almost for the offense. The time that I think about is when KU punted after they had gotten a first down near midfield.
Yeah.
1st and 10, Jalen throws it deep to Quentin Skinner. It's almost intercepted by Jeremiah Cooper, who I believe led the Big 12 in interceptions last year. Like, that's a play you'd expect that kid to make.
Yeah.
And he drops it. KU dodges the bullet. Then they punt, and then Iowa State takes it back, and then they score. And it just felt like at times a little bit in the second half, it felt a little bit erratic's not the right word, Kevin, but it was just inconsistent. And obviously,
Sure.
Bryce Cable goes down with the injury. Calvin Clements is in at left tackle. I didn't really notice him that much, and I mean that in the most positive way, where you
Yeah.
didn't see him getting his butt kicked in. He looked the part out there, and I just think that generally, though, KU's offense just lacked a little bit in the second half.
Yeah, I think there was a semblance of don't lose the game at this
Yeah,
point, right? It's, hey, you're in a good spot. You've got a double-digit lead. The big thing is just don't make the backbreaking mistake.
yeah,
And I think that there were multiple instances of that. You talked
yeah,
about the punt earlier. You talked, there's the field goal attempt that you wind up missing on 4th and 1, that I think a lot of people panned in real time, that said, hey, why is the field goal team coming out here? Go get the first down, and especially with the way that Kansas's offensive line had been playing, the way that they'd
yeah,
been running the ball, that seemed like a pretty good likelihood. That doesn't take Tabor Allen off the hook for missing from 30. He did make a 47-yarder earlier in the game, so. But at the same time, I did think Kansas went kind of conservative into, okay, whatever you do, do not make the big mistake. And the irony of that, Swain, is that a lot of times when you play like that, you may not make the big mistake,
mhm,
but a lot of times you let the other team back into it because your foot comes off the gas. And while Iowa State never got to a spot where Iowa State had the ball, down a single score or anything like, I don't think they got within a single score in the second half. But at the same time, there were some parts in the fourth quarter where the hair is starting to stand up on the back of your neck where it's like, okay, this is not as comfortable as it should be right now.
Yeah, you're right. And so there's the Jalen Jackson touchdown from Iowa State to make it
Yep.
38-28. And that comes right after that missed field goal from KU when it felt like, okay, Iowa State really hasn't stopped KU, right? That just hasn't really happened all game. And KU misses the field goal. They go down, they score on the 27-yard touchdown that had some really poor defending,
Yeah.
from KU, bad angles to the ball. Like there's a lot there that can be coached up. But then KU goes and that's when, excuse me, that punt that I was talking about happens. Actually, I
Yeah.
got that confused where they get to midfield, they have to punt. They punch at Iowa State. Iowa State starts at their own 10, and that's when the pick six happens. And Kevin, for so much of this season, KU has missed those high leverage plays.
Yes.
And I think you can look back at the end of the first half against UNLV, Kobe Bryant, in trying to make the high leverage play in that situation, or where he tries to jump up and intercept it, ball goes over his head as time expires, right guy runs in the end zone. You could say, hey, time and place, you don't need to go pick the ball off. The UNLV's already botched the timing of it. Like you could say, oh man, KU needs to get a big stop against TCU. They end up missing a bunch of tackles. Like there are so many times this season.
Illinois had like
Yeah.
35 third downs on their last few drives where it's like, just get off the field on one of them. And
Yeah.
they couldn't do it. And to your point, I mean, I hate bringing it up, but the fumble against UNLV that hits about 35 KU players. And yeah, I mean, there have been those moments kind of all season long. You look at Arizona State when they're setting up that the game-winning field goal. You know, Levitt has that run where Kansas is in a perfect position to stop it on third down, where Arizona State's going to have to kick it. You're going to have a lot more time to go down, and instead you wind up giving up a touchdown on that drive. And so, to your point, they've missed on almost. It seems crazy to say it, but they've missed on almost every potential high leverage play against Kansas State. They send a perfect blitz at Avery Johnson, and Marvin Grant gets there where he's a half second too late for the sack, and the ball hits a KU defender that could have been picked off and doesn't get picked off. The game-winning field goal comes on the next play. And so even when they've been in position to sort of make that game-changing play, they haven't made it. But in this case, it happened.
Yeah, exactly. And yeah, something about Melo going against Iowa State.
Yeah.
That, last year he had the pick six. It was a huge play in that game. This one's a huge play. And that was really the play that felt like, okay, this is over now. But a 10-point game with Iowa State getting the ball back, like, could they score to go make it a 3-point game? KU's offense got a little tight there, a little tight, like KU avoided, I think, of what could have been a very tense end of the game and could have made for some very different vibes post game. But that's what football's about sometimes, Kevin. Can your star players make the star plays? And this was a game where KU's star players really did make those big time plays. You can go at the beginning of the game, look at Luke Grimm. You can look at some of the plays that Jalen made. You can look at the interception from Melo. You can look at the way that some of KU's defensive ends played, like Jeremy Robinson having a big game. Like this was a game where KU's best players really stood tall in some really big moments. And again, that is something that's super encouraging. And it's just good to see for KU because they have missed that. And those guys have tried really hard to make those plays. And I think it's a credit to all of them that here we are in November. The season has not gone the way they've wanted. It hasn't been good for a long time. And they're still out there competing and really straining to make those big time plays when, if KU would have shut up shop after the bye week, after the Sunflower Showdown, like you've seen other college teams do it. That's all I'll say. And I think the fact that KU didn't is super, super a positive reflection of the program right now and just how much it's changed, right? I think there are plenty of other past KU teams that would have folded.
Yeah, I 100% agree. I think even with this year's team, a lot of people felt like, hey, being up 10, Iowa State has the ball. Iowa State's going to go right down the field here, and here we go again. And instead, it never really got to that here we go again level, at least not that high of a level because of the mellow dots in play. And it was a good win for Kansas for a lot of reasons. Obviously, a win over a team that was ranked, a win over a team that was undefeated up until a week ago.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I think it was big for them in that they talk all the time about the process, right? And hey, get better each rep, get better each day. But I do think you need to see something positive there to let them know that hey, this is going on the right track. And I think the unfortunate thing about the K State loss is because of the way they lost that game, everybody was saying, "Oh, here we go again. It's same old, same old." Swain, if they played the way they did against K State, against Illinois, or against UNLV, or against West Virginia, they probably would have won all of those games by double digits. It was one of KU's better played games of the year. And I think you can see from that first bye week, Arizona State offense was really good, defense really struggled, but you had the bye week. Kansas played great against Houston. I thought Kansas played pretty well against K State, made some big mistakes at inopportune times, but it was a really good team that they were playing. And then to play this way against Iowa State, I think it shows that the team is continuing to improve as the season is going on. And that's not necessarily something that people want to hear when you're 3-6, especially with the expectations and everything. But just circling back to your point, it 100% shows that the players haven't quit, that the coaches haven't quit, and that they're continuing to take a stab at this thing.
Yeah, and there's still stuff on the table for KU, and that's what makes the end of the season super interesting. Going to play BYU on the road after BYU had a late comeback, dare I say controversial based on what the Utah AD said. I don't know what he's talking about, but BYU off the back of a huge rivalry win at night.
Yep.
That's not going to be an easy game, but here I am looking at it, Kevin. KU's a 2.5, 3.5 point dog. And I'm not going to tell you KU can't win this game.
Yeah.
You look at Colorado. I bet you KU, depending on what happens against BYU, let's say KU beats BYU. KU's probably a 3-point favorite against Colorado at home. And then let's say KU beats Colorado, then all of a sudden there may be a, pick them maybe at Baylor, depending on what Baylor does. Like, this is an end of the season that it's going to be another moments. It's going to come down to moments for KU down the stretch here. And I think the positive thing you can look at and say that KU has made a lot more moments recently. They didn't do quite enough against K-State, but you can look at what KU was able to do against Houston. You look what they would against Iowa State, right? Coming up with those big plays and those high leverage moments is really important, especially when you're playing in so many stupid one-score games. So, there's still plenty on the table for KU. Are they going to get there? Look, last week, if you want to go by numbers, and I know ESPN FPI is bleh, it's meh at best, but they gave
their FPI somehow is better than their BPI, which is saying something.
True. Yeah, that is true. But they gave about 3% chance. I think that's up to like 10 or 11% now. But look, it's one of those where if you're to tell me a team that can go on a run to end a season, I'd say this one, because they've shown you that they're one of the best teams in this conference. They've just screwed up in some high leverage moments. And guess what happens when you do that and you're playing one-score games? You lose the games. And so if KU can avoid that, like, there's no reason why KU can't win out. Am I going to bet on that to happen? Probably not, because you're asking for a lot to go right in these final few games, including 2 on the road, which is not easy. But I say all that, it can still happen, and crazier things have happened. So it should be an exciting game against BYU, and it should be an exciting end of the season, because regardless, KU is going to be in all these games.
Do you feel like KU almost kind of matches up fairly well with BYU?
I honestly haven't looked at the matchup enough. I've watched BYU a little bit this year. Their special team scares me. Like, they are liable to run one back against you at any time. But I've not looked at their numbers, and I need to go watch some more of them. But from what I've seen, like, their offense is fine. Their defense is solid. Like, they're another Big 12 school, Kevin. They got some good stuff. They got some mess stuff, and it's going to be a one-score game.
They've been in some one-score games that they found ways to win. And it's funny because I think heading into this season, a big part of the reason that a lot of us were so optimistic was to your point about the Big 12 being the NFL without the players, that's speaking to parity, right? Like
Yeah,
anybody's
exactly.
capable of beating anybody else on a given week. I think a lot of us felt like, well, KU's talent level combined with all the experience, that's going to put them maybe just above the parity, and that didn't happen.
No.
Right? They still wound up being relatively close with a lot of other teams, and unfortunately, that meant close games that Kansas thus far has struggled to close out.
Mhm.
And so, when you look at what's still ahead for KU, the potential of a bowl berth and the things that go with that, Kansas is going to have to win a close game or two probably to get across that finish line. I'm not saying they can't. Like to your point, I really do think that this is potentially one of the better teams in the Big 12, especially when they play well.
Yeah.
But the question is, are they going to make that play in that moment, the play that Mello Dotson made, not necessarily in a close game, but still a game where you're kind of breathing through a paper bag a little bit at that point to slow down the hyperventilation. Like if you make that play at that moment, then Kansas can have a vastly different end of the season than it had the start to the season.
Exactly. So, Kevin, let's do a quick word on Devin Neal.
Sure.
Obviously, a special player and a special human being.
Yeah.
Hearing Lance talk about him this week and hearing Devin talk, you do start to reflect a little bit because it is coming to an end, right? We're into the final kind of quarter of the season now. 3 games left. Devin's got 3 guaranteed games left in this KU uniform, and he is someone that is obviously going to be known for just how freaking good he was as a football player. The record book is rewritten by him, but the impact he's had on KU overall, I think, is super special.
Yeah.
Obviously, being a Lawrence guy, right? He is active in the community, but I think what he means to the program too, in terms of a talented running back, a talented player that certainly could have gone elsewhere if he even thought about it, which I don't think he ever would have or did, but he could have gone anywhere, especially after 2021 when things weren't going well, but he was bought in. And I think he's the type of player that can send you a really good message to other local recruits and other local people. And I thought Devin had the tweet of the weekend. It made me literally laugh out loud. It's one of my favorite memes out there. It's the absolute cinema.
Yeah.
And he tweeted out 785 weekend and tagged Zeke Mayo, who obviously had his own good game on Friday night against North Carolina. But it's just one of those where it's such a cool story, and it's what makes college football so awesome. Is when there are local guys who stay home and are able to make a huge impact. And KU is not where it is today without Devin Neal. They aren't. They're not. They're probably not even close. That's how special of a player and how much I think he means to this program within the walls, and how much he sets an example to other people of what it looks like to work hard and what it looks like to prepare right and to be available and to be accountable. And so I think overall it's been really cool personally to be able to see him, and he's just a standout guy and a standout football player. So I'm thankful that I at least was able to be around for this, and I think that a lot of people probably feel that way too.
Yeah, when he picked Kansas, Ryan Wallace, who of course is at Go Power Cat at 24/7 Sports, he and I were talking and saying, "Man, this guy is going to be an ambassador for the KU program," and he has wound up being all of that and more. I can't help but remember when they did the beam raising at the new booth when they did the whole ceremony and everything. Devin was one of the guys who spoke, obviously, and Travis Goff was talking afterwards, and he said that Devin had basically made a comment like, "Man, it kind of stinks that I won't be able to play here." And Goff said that what he said back to Devin was, "Devin, you built it. Your success here and a lot of the success that the program has been able to find that it hadn't had for a decade plus." Was important to get people excited enough to donate money for all the stadium improvements and things that they needed to do. And so when you look at it from that standpoint, when you look at it from, like you said, how involved he is in the community, like it'd be one thing if he were just 1,000-yard back and he were a jerk, right? Like you'd just kind of be like, well, all right, it is what it is. But he's used every bit of influence that he's had, I think, to go about things the right way. And
Yeah.
quite frankly, I think his impact on Kansas will be felt long after he's gone.
Totally, totally. Do you have favorite performance from Devin? I know, obviously, right, 3 games to go. He could do a big one over the last couple weeks. Like, but do you have a favorite one?
I like this one in part because of some of the absurdity that it caused. His performance against Oklahoma State to send Kansas to a bowl game in 2022 was terrific. But the other funny thing that I'm not sure a lot of people know about, but I know we've talked about it, Devin Neal picked up a vote after 2022 for Big 12 Offensive
Yeah,
Player
he
of the
did.
Year. And they don't say who did it, but I would bet just about everything I have in my house right now that it was Mike Gundy after the way that Devin Neal played in that game. And you look at that was a game coming off of the bye week again. Jason Bean wasn't the Jason Bean that we saw at the end of the year. He was a guy saw at the end of last year, I should say.
Yeah.
He was a guy that was still struggling and was very hit and miss. And we talked about on the podcast, he was a guy that sometimes would have a big game, and then when it came down to the last couple drives when you needed the offense to do something, he struggled. And for Devin Neal to come out and have the performance that he did and just basically leave no doubt that Kansas was going to a bowl game, because you think about that 5-0 start, college game day comes, you lose to TCU, you lose Jalen Daniels for most of the season. If Kansas had gone 5-7 that year, if they had lost their last 7 games and not gone to a bowl game, we could have been sitting in a different spot. Things could have been different a year ago, maybe not nearly as good. People would probably consider Lance Leipold a little bit differently if they hadn't gone to bowls and back-to-back years.
Yeah.
And so for Devin to have that performance in that situation to where somebody would vote for him for Big 12 Offensive Player of the Year, but also to send Kansas to a bowl game when it hadn't been since 2008, I think was probably my favorite. If you're picking a favorite Devin Neal performance, other than him saying "What's up" to Jordan Gusky every time he sees him, what would it be?
Yeah, that is funny. I mean, it's got to be Oklahoma State. Like, that is, if you want to think about like iconic performances, like that is the definition of an iconic performance. And I just pulled up the story we wrote around the game, because I want to get my facts right here. What's crazy about that game too is that Lance Leipold kind of called it. There was a post going around that week about Tony Sands, the 58 carry, basically 400-yard performance he had against Missouri. And Lance sent Devin this tweet from like college football history, and told him like it might be one of those days. And Devin just sent back an eyeball emoji. And then you look at him, and dude freaking had like, a bajillion yards through the air and on the ground. Like it was just an iconic performance, right? 200 yards on the ground, 100 yards through the air, like just to put your team on your back. And let's be real here, Kevin, if that is your average college football running back in that game, it's probably a close game. And in the end, right, KU dominates, and they win 37-16, and they're able to go to the bowl game because your running back just had an incredible performance. And I'll say this too. Another game that comes to mind for me is K-State last year.
Yes, that was the other one.
I know KU didn't win, but that was another one of those where that was an experienced player putting the offense on his back, because Cole Ballard ran a rudimentary offense that game. KU had to do it. And Devin basically said, all right, don't worry, guys. Our quarterback is going to be hamstrung a little bit because he's young and isn't inexperienced. I got this, right? Multiple touchdowns, 130 plus yards on the ground. Like, that was another one of those. And if KU had won that game, that one probably is up there with the Oklahoma State game. But because KU didn't win, obviously it's a little different. But just there's so many of those games. And I think I was talking to someone else about this. So many moments too. There's the long touchdown run against Texas Tech. That was an FU run last year.
Great. Yeah.
Right. You can think back to 2022 and some of the runs he had. That's like, he has had a lot of great individual plays and great individual performances. But it's really cool too, the consistency. Like, this isn't a guy that goes and rushes for 200 and then 50. Like, he's kind of just always between 85 and 120 every game. And the fact that he's so consistent is why he's obviously in the position he is. But that just speaks to how he prepares every game, how he is ready to play, and how he is just a guy that when the lights are on, you know who you can count on. And he is one of those guys. And it's just cool that he's been able to achieve all this stuff and reset the record book. And these are a lot of records that are not going to be broken.
Yeah, I think the K-State game is a great example, especially since everybody in that stadium knew Devin Neal had to get the ball for Kansas to win. K-State knew it, everybody knew it, and so to perform in that situation where it wasn't very easy. I mean, you've got not just a true freshman quarterback starting; it's his first ever start.
Yeah,
He had come in against Texas Tech the previous week, but it was his first ever start. And he was a walk-on. He wasn't even a guy that Kansas brought in on on a scholarship who was a really highly recruited guy. And I think we've since found out that, Cole's got some toughness to him and he's got some gamer to him. But at the same time, that was just a terrific performance that gave Kansas every chance to win that game. But
yeah.
I also think the run against Illinois, where he about caused Yakis to fall over
Yes.
in 23 was pretty special. That I like the Tech carry. One of his carries against K-State. I mean, he made a guy miss in a phone booth, for the long touchdown run that he had, and he's just a guy that feels like he consistently outperform. As somebody who watches him week to week like we do, he's somebody that feels like carry after carry, he outperforms what's there, right?
Yeah.
It feels like a 2-yard run, he's getting 4. If it feels like, hey, this is a 5-yard run, he might be breaking it for 8 or 9. And so he does a terrific job.
Yeah. Well, that's what I've got. Any final thoughts on this Saturday, Kevin? I just think it's a game that KU needed to have, obviously. A quality first half, shaky second half, but you get the win, and obviously a great day for Devin Neal and his family and all of that. But I think that's what I got thoughts-wise on the game, Kevin. You got anything else?
No, I think if the offensive line plays like that, I thought the blocking at the second level was good too on several plays. But if the offensive line plays like that and Kansas gets this version of Jalen Daniels and Quentin Skinner, Kansas can play with and beat anybody on the remaining schedule. So it'll be interesting to see.
That it will, Kevin. That it will. We'll be back next Sunday with another episode. Thanks as always for listening to the Fog.net podcast. If you're watching this on YouTube, thanks for watching. Appreciate you. Make sure you're liking the video, subscribe to the channel, click that little notification bell. You get an alert anytime we post something, press conferences, individual post-game walk and talk breakdown stuff, or stand and talks, depending on where we're at, podcast, all that sort of stuff. You get all those alerts. If you're listening on your podcast platform of choice, please leave a rating and review. Those go a long way in helping us out in the old algorithm. Thanks as always for listening to the podcast. We'll talk to you all in just a couple of days.